You thought they forgot you because they stopped speaking, because the messages got shorter, because the warmth vanished, because one day it felt like you were trying to hold a conversation with a locked door. And then the door disappeared. No fight, no real ending. Just distance, so clean it almost felt surgical. And that is the part that haunts you. Not just that they left, but how untouched they seemed by leaving. How they could go quiet so fast. How they could act normal while you were still replaying their voice at 2 a.m. Still reopening the last message. Still trying to find the exact moment love turned into absence. It makes you ask a brutal question. Did any of it matter to them at all? And the answer is harder than you think. Because if they were avoidant, the truth is not that they felt nothing. It is that they felt too much, in the wrong places. What broke the bond was not always lack of care. Sometimes it was overwhelm. Sometimes it was closeness landing in a nervous system that learned, a long time ago, that love can become pressure, need can become danger, and intimacy can become a silent demand to lose yourself, just to keep someone near. So when the relationship got deeper, when your emotions got louder, when your presence became more real, something in them did not relax. It braced. And that is what most people never understand about the avoidant ex. They mistake distance for indifference. They mistake numbness for freedom. They mistake disappearing for moving on. But a person can leave your arms and still not leave the emotional architecture of what happened between you. A person can go silent and still be internally organized around what they are trying not to feel. That is why avoidant people often look fine before they actually are. Because for them, disconnection can feel like relief before it feels like grief. And relief is seductive. At first, their body interprets space as safety. No difficult conversations, no emotional intensity, no one looking too closely, no one asking, "What are you really feeling right now?" No one touching the bruise underneath the self-control. So yes, they can look calm. But calm is not always peace. Sometimes it is suppression. Sometimes it is a nervous system slamming the door before the room catches fire. This is where the psychology matters, but not in a cold, clinical way, in a human way. In the way that helps you stop taking their behavior as a verdict on your worth. People with avoidant attachment often rely on what psychologists call deactivating strategies. In simple language, they downplay their need for closeness, suppress attachment feelings, lean into compulsive self-reliance, and distance themselves when emotions get too intense. Research on adult attachment describes avoidant attachment as linked to suppression rather than true emotional resolution, and even notes that this strategy can hold for only so long before overwhelm breaks through. That means the shutdown you witnessed may not have been proof they were over you. It may have been the only way they knew how not to drown. Their body learns to mute before it learns to process. Their mind says, "I'm fine." Their nervous system says, "Run." And the tragedy is, they often believe the mind. So they leave the conversation, the relationship, the memory, the entire emotional scene before the deeper wave reaches them. Not because you were meaningless, because meaning was becoming dysregulating. That is the brutal truth. The more emotionally important the bond became, the more likely they were to feel internally crowded by it. Not always visibly, not dramatically, but biologically. When intimacy starts waking up old fear, the brain does not always separate love from threat. The amygdala can treat emotional closeness like an alarm. Stress chemistry rises, the body shifts toward control. Suppression takes over. Some attachment research also suggests avoidant patterns are associated with reduced reward response to positive social cues and with more effortful control around negative social scenes, which helps explain why love can feel less like comfort and more like pressure inside them. So, while you were moving toward connection, they may have been moving toward regulation. While you were trying to repair, they may have been trying to breathe. While you were reading the breakup as emotional abandonment, they may have been experiencing it as escape from internal overload. And that changes everything. Because now the question is no longer, why was I so easy to lose? The question becomes, what happens to a person who escapes before they actually feel what they escaped from? This is where silence becomes the central concept. Not silence as punishment, not silence as a game. Silence as the place where their defenses lose something to push against. When you keep chasing an avoidant ex, you accidentally help them maintain their emotional distance from themselves. Your messages, your reactions, your pain, your attempts to get clarity, all of it gives them something external to manage. They can focus on your intensity instead of their emptiness. They can call it pressure instead of loss. They can frame you as too much and never have to sit still long enough to hear what your absence is saying. But when you stop, something shifts. When there is no new message to ignore, no new argument to avoid, no emotional fire to outrun, they are left alone with a quieter thing. The echo. And the echo is dangerous because it is delayed. Avoidant people often do not feel the breakup in real time the way anxious people do. They feel relief first, space first, control first, a strange lightness first. That first stage can look like freedom. It can even look like happiness. Then life gets silent. Then your rituals disappear from their day. Then no one is checking in. Then no one is reaching for them. Then the emotional stimulus is gone, but the imprint remains. And this is when the mind starts wandering back. Not always because they want reconciliation, sometimes because absence finally becomes digestible in small pieces. They remember the softness they criticized, the consistency they took for granted, the text they thought was needy, the warmth they called overwhelming, the way you cared in a world where most people only perform interest until it asks something of them. Now there is no pressure, only memory. And memory is much harder to deactivate than a living person asking for closeness. That is why your avoidant ex may not fully move on, because they did not fully feel it when it ended. They postponed it. They compartmentalized it. They sedated it with distraction, work, routine, new attention, surface-level conversations, maybe even another connection that feels safer only because it is not deep yet. But whatever is postponed has a way of waiting in the dark, and eventually it asks to be paid. You can see it in the strange ways they circle back, the random check-in, the late-night profile view, the indirect reach-out, the sudden nostalgia, the curiosity after months of distance, the subtle testing of whether you are still emotionally available, whether the door is still open, whether they still have access to the version of you that made them feel safe without demanding too much truth from them. And if you are not careful, this is where the old pattern restarts. Because the moment they reappear, your pain lights up. Hope rushes in. Dopamine floods the empty places. You think, finally. Now they get it. Now they miss me enough. Now the silence worked. But missing you is not the same as being ready for intimacy. Longing is not the same as capacity. Regret is not the same as repair. An avoidant ex can miss you deeply and still repeat the pattern if nothing inside them has changed. This is the warning nobody gives clearly enough. Do not confuse delayed emotion with transformation. Do not mistake a crack in their armor for an open heart. And do not hand them your healing just because they returned carrying fragments of awareness they should have been building all along. Because if you break your own growth the second they feel lonely, the dynamic resets. You become the regulator again, the pursuer again, the emotional container again, the one translating their silence, excusing their inconsistency, romanticizing their confusion, and calling it depth because the chemistry is intense. No, intensity is not intimacy. Silence is not mystery. Distance is not power. And the version of you who still thinks love must be earned through waiting is exactly the version this pattern feeds on. So let's go deeper. What they think in the quiet is rarely as simple as, "I don't care." It sounds more like this. "I don't know why I feel irritated when someone gets too close. I miss them, but contacting them feels heavy. I think about them when I'm alone, but when they want something real from me, I shut down. I know they were good to me, so why did I feel trapped? Why do I only feel the tenderness after they're gone?" These are not the thoughts of someone untouched. These are the thoughts of someone split. Someone whose body learned to associate dependence with danger, whose reflex is to regain control by reducing contact, reducing emotion, reducing vulnerability, until the relationship is small enough to tolerate. But love does not disappear just because someone suppresses it. It changes form. It goes underground. It shows up as restlessness, numb curiosity, irritation that has no clear target, sudden dreams, emotional flatness in new relationships, a compulsive need to stay busy, a weird inability to replace what they themselves walked away from. Because what they lost was not just a person, it was a nervous system experience. It was the specific mirror you held up to parts of them they could not easily hide from. The tenderness, the fear, the longing, the dependency they hate feeling, the hope they distrust, the need they were trained to bury. You were not just loved, you were activating. That is why being forgotten is not always the danger. Sometimes the deeper truth is that they carry you as unresolved emotional material. Not beautifully, not romantically, but persistently. And here is the part where the power dynamic begins to flip. Not because you manipulate it, because you stop feeding the illusion that your worth depends on being chosen by someone emotionally unavailable. When you stop pleading for understanding, you become harder to rewrite. When you stop over-explaining, your energy becomes less consumable. When you stop reaching towards someone who only values you at a distance, the distance changes meaning. Now it is no longer their escape. It is your boundary. Now your absence is not emptiness, it is evidence. Evidence that access to you is no longer automatic. Evidence that your love is no longer begging to be handled carefully by someone who keeps dropping it. Evidence that your nervous system is learning a new story. I do not chase people who confuse my devotion with pressure. And that is when many avoidant exes begin to feel the loss differently. Because the script has changed. You are no longer proving that you will remain emotionally available no matter how little they offer. You are no longer standing at the door asking to be let in. You are no longer translating crumbs into hope. You become still. And stillness is terrifying to people who depend on distance to feel in control. Because now, there is no easy reassurance that you are still waiting. No easy refill. No easy emotional certainty. Just consequence. Just your disappearance from the role they unconsciously assigned you. And suddenly, they start leaning in. Watching. Wondering. Missing. Sometimes obsessing, not because they suddenly became secure, but because your silence interrupted the system that allowed them to keep half feeling everything. Now they feel the whole outline of your absence. Now they notice that not everyone loved them with that kind of patience. Now they see what your consistency was worth. But listen carefully. This is not your invitation to become available the second they become emotional. This is your invitation to become unavailable to the cycle. There is a difference. Real power is not making them chase. Real power is no longer needing to be chased to feel chosen. Real self-worth is not sitting on a throne of revenge, hoping they finally suffer enough to validate your pain. Real self-worth is quieter than that. It is the moment you understand, with your whole body, that their inability to hold closeness was never proof of your insufficiency. You were not too deep. You were not too loving. You were not too much. You were standing in front of a person whose survival strategy was to reduce need before need could reduce them. And if they never fully move on, that is their unfinished lesson, not your future. Your lesson is different. Your lesson is to stop measuring your value by how long someone avoids feeling you. To stop confusing emotional unavailability with hidden depth. To stop calling your abandonment wound intuition. To stop returning to the scene of your own diminishing just because one day they might finally have language for what they destroyed. Maybe they miss you. Maybe they think about you in the quiet. Maybe your absence unsettles them for a very long time. Maybe part of them never fully moves on, because part of them never fully arrived. But your healing cannot be built around becoming unforgettable to someone who could not stay present. Your healing has to become stronger than the fantasy that one day their delayed grief will come back and crown your suffering with meaning. You do not need that ending. You need your life back. You need your nervous system back. You need the part of you that knows love should not require self-erasure. So let them feel the silence. Let them meet the echo. Let them discover, in whatever lonely hour finds them, that what they ran from was not your weakness, but your intimacy. Not your neediness, but your sincerity. Not your excess, but the unbearable clarity of being loved by someone who could actually stay. And you? Stay with yourself. That is the final shift. Not, how do I make them realize what they lost? But, why would I keep abandoning myself to be remembered by someone who abandoned presence the moment love became real? That question changes everything. Because the moment you truly outgrow the chase, the story stops being about whether your avoidant ex ever fully moves on, and starts becoming about the one person who finally did. You.